Hello, I'm Odyssey, and welcome back to another Redstone tutorial. It's been a while since I said that, but this new snapshot is so good. It's even brought someone like myself out of cryostasis. And there are two things in particular that were added in the snapshot that just open up a world of possibilities. One of them is the shulker box, and the other one is the observer block. And the first rabbit hole that I went down was the observer block. And I figured since, I'm coming out of cryostasis, what better thing to try to make than an ice farm. And what I have for you today is first iteration of an observer block ice farm. I don't know if it's perfect, but it's a good start, that's for sure. And man, I gotta admit, when Mojang first announced observer blocks, I was a little pessimistic. I was like, well, whatever. It's probably just going to be like a smaller bud block. But these things, they're so cool. You can do so many things that we just could only imagine doing before. In fact, there's so many neat little mechanics taking place in this farm alone. I don't even know where to start with the explanation. There's just so much stuff. Let's start with what's familiar. So you have your little ice tray here, right? You have your water blocks under here. So that way, this always creates source blocks. Because when you cover up water with a block, it does not freeze. And so we have infinite water source blocks here. And whenever one turns into ice, these observer blocks here will recognize it. They'll send out a pulse, which will cause some stuff to happen. The ice block will get sucked down and then pushed sideways. You could always do something like that involving buds in the past, but obviously not quite as compacted and not as neat and easy to understand. So this is just really cool. Now where this gets interesting is in the stacker over here. So what we have going on here is, how would you describe this? I guess this is a smart piston array, right? So if we come over here, I have like a little, what would you describe? A cross section, there you go, of this whole system. And this is basically one giant smart piston here. So if we go ahead and push a few more ice blocks over, when an ice block hits that observer block, what happens is it sends a signal up here, then it propagates a signal through all of these repeaters, which updates the observers below them. These repeaters aren't actually powering anything. What they're there for is just to update the observers beneath them, which then powers the pistons, and then the pistons push the blocks down. So that's like a neat little, one wide tileable smart piston array. And this is really good compared to, or what's so good about this compared to ice farms in the past is that it's way less laggy, right? In the past, whenever you used a stacker, like every time a block would get pushed over, the whole piston array would fire. Like every single one of these pistons would fire just to move one row of blocks, which is not good for lag reduction. Now I have come up with a few different versions of I don't even know what to call these things, the little one wide ice farm things. We have a vertical version here, it's upwards. Did I not place that in the right place? Did not. And then I have a downwards version here. Yeah, they're okay. I mean, like, the upwards version is nice and easy to make, but it goes up, which is not as useful. Going down is useful. I didn't quite like this one though, because it's a bit more complicated, as you can see. I do think the sideways version, which I got over here, it's the best of both worlds. It's pretty easy to make, and it's also very convenient to have the ice blocks go sideways, because then you just push them downwards. But oh man, let's get a little bit more technical here, and I want to see if I can get across one of the things that's got me so excited about observer blocks, which is not quite so obvious. So let's head over here. I lied. Actually, I did record a clip there, but I ended up rambling on for a bit too long. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and put that clip at the end of the video. And if you're interested in a more technical look at the observer block, and more specifically a discussion on whether or not the observer block should be instantaneous, you can stay tuned for that towards the end of the video. But for right now, let's just keep our focus on the ice farm itself. There's a couple more things I want to do here. First, I want to take a closer look at this circuit, the main circuit, and then I want to address fail-safing the farm and keeping the farm from breaking. So first of all, let's take a close look at this circuit. You have the observer block on the same level of where your water is, right? So you have the water source block here, another water source block there. This will be covered, right? And then you'll have some other structured block here, keeping the water contained. And the bottom is actually just ice blocks. So we're actually using the ice blocks themselves as the floor to keep the water from flowing down. I thought that was pretty cool. So you don't need a floor. All you need is ice blocks. But when this forms into ice, well, this will be water right here. So pretend that's water. When this forms into ice, this will be pulled down and pushed that way. So the observer block is going to be right there at water level. Outside of that observer block, you're going to have a 2-tick repeater going into a downwards facing piston with the redstone block. That is going to go into another 2-tick repeater, which goes into a block, and a torch going into this upwards facing sticky piston. Right, so this one right here is a sticky piston, and then on top of this block you're going to have an observer block facing this direction. So that's how you're going to place it, and that observer block is going to be going into a normal piston. So sticky piston here, normal piston there, and that's all there is to it. It's a pretty simple design. That's why I like it. But now that that's all said and done, I want to talk about keeping the farm from breaking. So as it turns out, these observer blocks do have a downside, and that is when you reach the piston push limit, it kind of breaks them. So let me just go ahead and simulate that by, sorry for the loudness, but we're going to intentionally break the farm here. Okay, there we go. So we've reached the piston push limit, and this is just no longer going to work. So even if we come back through here, right, and break all this ice, and we're no longer at the push limit, this is just sort of permanently stuck because it's never going to re-update because there's a solid block in front of it. So what we need to do is we need to prevent that from happening. And the way I would prevent that by happening is actually, somewhere down here, not at the piston, or maybe even at the push limit, or maybe one block above the push limit, I would put a observer, right? And what this observer is going to do is it's going to wait for the ice to get to a certain level. And then what it will do is it will send a signal up here, and I think the best way of shutting this farm off is actually by closing, using a shutter system. So basically by pushing blocks over these water source blocks so that they cannot turn into ice. I believe that to be probably the best way of shutting the farm off. Actually, let me go ahead and build that. So it's better to have a visual demonstration, right? So let me go ahead and build that fail-safe system, and then you can see it in action. Alright, so I have built the shutter system, and got the fail-safe system all thought out now. So what we got right here is just a very basic shutter system where when this line of redstone gets powered, what will happen is it will push slabs over these water source blocks, and that will prevent the source blocks from turning into ice, which essentially shuts the farm off. And the way we're going to activate this is by toggling a redstone block from one of these observer blocks. So whatever level you want your ice to grow to, right? You'll have an observer block there, and when it grows to that level, it will activate the observer block, which will send a signal up here. Oh, do I have I must have a backwards facing. Yeah, I do have these are all backwards. It helps if your observer blocks aren't backwards. Let's retry this. Oh, that's probably what I did last time too. Let's go like this. There we go. Let's try this again. It's probably all screwed up now too. Alright, so you have your shutter system in place. You have your observer blocks facing the right direction. When the ice grows down to this level, it's going to trigger this observer block, which will cause this piston to leave a block behind, powering this line of redstone and closing the shutter, therefore shutting the farm off. Now later on, when you come back with your pickaxe and you start harvesting all of these ice blocks here, la-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da, eventually when you come here and you break this ice block right there, it will reset the system, opening the shutters and allowing the farm to once again start operating. So that's the way I would go about designing a fail-safe system for this farm. There might be a more clever way, but this is pretty straightforward and pretty easy to understand, so I'm happy with it. But anyways, that is the farm, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you are learning some stuff about the new observer blocks and having as much fun as I am, rehashing old ideas. If you want to take part in a more technical discussion on the observer block and whether or not the observer block should be instant, Stay tuned for this little clip where I kind of talk about why I believe the observer block should stay instant. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. There will be a world download in the video description, and I'll see you later. Alright, so here we are at a little mirrored section of the farm that we got over there, except I am not using the observer block right here. I'm using torches, and this is one of the things that's got me so excited about observer blocks that I want to see if I can help people understand. Now, as a redstoner, or a technical Minecrafter of any sort, for a long time now, whenever we've made complex piston contraptions, there's this thing called piston order. And piston order is which pistons fire first when two pistons can fire. So for example, both of these pistons get powered at the same time. Well, they can't fire at the same time. One of them's got to fire first, right? And unfortunately, for quite a while, we have been subject to the whims of orientation and hash mapping when it comes to piston order. Things do not always work the way you expect them to, and they do not work the same way depending on orientation. And this is a perfect example. So let's take a look at this farm right here. And which orientation is this? Oops, hit the wrong button. This is the east and west orientation. And let's go ahead and place a block there. Works perfectly fine, right? Now right here you have the mirrored version. And you would expect this to work exactly the same as that does. But oh no, it does not. Once again, we are subject to the whims of orientation when it comes to piston order. And this is a very frustrating thing as a redstoner, right? Well, lo and behold, the advent of the observer block. Now what's so good about the observer block? The best thing about the observer block is that it's instant. Let's take a look at this situation here where we are now powering this piston with an instant pulse. What's so good about this is we can now determine piston order regardless of orientation, regardless of hash mapping, because we can say, okay, this one's instant, this one takes one tick. So if we look at this same situation here, now all of a sudden this works because we are specifying that this piston fires before this piston because we have an instant observer block going to it. And that is, I can't really understate how useful that is. Okay, so where am I going with this discussion? The reason I'm bringing up the instantaneous nature of observer blocks is because I'm aware of the fact that when Mojang first announced observer blocks, they made it clear that it was like a quick implementation and it was not necessarily the finalized version. And what they're doing right now is they're waiting for feedback on the community for any changes to make to the observer block before they're finalized. And one of the discussions happening right now is whether or not the observer block should be instantaneous. Now I of course am very happy with the instantaneous observer blocks, but what I want to do is I want to provide a couple arguments to support that. One of course is being able to control piston order, but another very interesting one that I discovered on this project was when it comes to smart pistons. So let's take a look at this smart piston array that we've made over here. And some of you might say, okay, Odyssey, did you really need the observer blocks right there? Couldn't you have just used like a torch tower? And the answer to that is no. The observer blocks are actually necessary in this situation. And the reason for that is that if this smart piston has any delay, and in fact if any smart piston with an observer block has any delay, it will cause a clock. The only reason smart pistons and observer blocks work is because they're instantaneous. I got some demonstrations over here that I can show you to easily explain the situation. So right here we have 3 different instant smart pistons. Really cool designs. Very simple, right? So just using 2 observer blocks in various configurations. And here we have an instant up. So you can just hold right click. Right here we have an instant down. And over here we have an instant sideways smart piston. All very useful, all very easy to make. But over here I've got the same designs, except I've introduced a single tick of delay. And let's see what happens. That starts a clock. That starts a clock. And yeah, they all start clocks. So why does this happen? The reason this happens is that when you have a delay in the circuit, when you place this block here, it updates the observer block, which causes the piston to extend. But because the piston does not retract fast enough, the retraction of the piston causes a second update, which causes another signal to be produced, which causes the piston to extend, which causes a signal to be produced, right? It creates an infinite cycle. And I've been trying to figure out ways to make smart pistons using observer blocks with, assuming they did not have an instant signal. And it's very difficult. Like I've even tried things like T flip-flops, but that doesn't work out because observer blocks are dual-edged, right? So they activate on the leading edge and the falling edge. So if you try to use a T flip-flop, all you end up doing is doubling the cycle of the clock. So that's not a solution. I'm not saying there's not a solution, but whatever it is much more complicated than this, right? I mean, these are just so easy and they're so useful. The fact that with just 2 observer blocks and some redstone dust, you can make like these instant smart pistons is so good. it's so useful. And if you did not, if the observer blocks were not instantaneous, you would not be able to do stuff like this, because you would create clocks whenever you tried to make smart pistons. So that's my 2 cents. People are arguing about whether or not it should be a delay, whether it should be instant. That's my argument as to why observer blocks should be instant. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you think observer blocks should be instant or maybe have a delay? But yeah, anyway, hopefully this was constructive. Hopefully you learned some things about the new mechanics and the new observer blocks and stuff. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.